167 seconds, 2 minutes and 47 seconds. Congressman Jared Moskowitz stood up, held a FEMA disaster relief allocation report above his head, and asked the question that would silence the entire chamber longer than any question about missing money in congressional history. Mr. Miller, this report shows $2.7 billion allocated from the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund in fiscal year 2025. The authorization states hurricane and wildfire emergency response, but FEMA has no record of deploying this money to any disaster zone. No hurricane survivors received it. No wildfire victims saw it. The families still waiting for help never got a single dollar. So I have one very simple question. Where are the disaster funds? Miller's hands went completely still on the table, his face drained of color in real time. Not pale, drained, like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. His lead attorney grabbed his wrist under the table, but it was too late. The FEMA report was on every screen in the room, and Jared Moskowitz, the former director of Florida's Division of Emergency Management, the man who managed hurricane response for the third largest state in the country, had not even started breaking down the allocation timeline yet. If you are new to Patel Report Files, subscribe right now, because what you are about to witness is someone who actually saved lives during disasters, dismantling someone who allegedly stole money meant for victims. House Oversight Committee, Room 254, Wednesday morning, 11:23 a.m. Eastern. The hearing was listed as Oversight of Federal Emergency Management Spending and Disaster Response Coordination. Emergency Management Spending. Routine oversight language designed to sound procedural, administrative. It was neither. Moskowitz walked in carrying a weathered leather briefcase, old, worn, the kind someone carries through actual emergency operations, not polished leather for show. Inside that briefcase was a single document, 284 pages. FEMA Office of Inspector General Audit, completed 8 weeks earlier, classified as law enforcement sensitive until 4 days ago when a federal judge ordered its release to Congress. Miller arrived with his standard legal team. 3 attorneys. He looked confident, prepared. He had briefing materials about emergency authorization protocols, disaster declaration procedures, interagency coordination frameworks. He thought he could navigate questions about FEMA policy. He had not prepared for someone who ran actual disaster operations. He had not prepared for Jared Moskowitz. The first 45 minutes were standard. Other representatives asked their questions. Emergency preparedness protocols, FEMA response times, coordination with state agencies. Miller gave smooth answers, professional, controlled. He referenced policy frameworks. He cited federal guidelines. He looked comfortable. Then Moskowitz took the microphone and said 4 words that changed everything. Let's talk about hurricanes. The room shifted. The energy changed. Moskowitz opened his briefcase, pulled out the FEMA audit, set it on the table with a sound loud enough to echo through the microphones. Mr. Miller, I ran emergency management for the state of Florida for 4 years. I managed response and recovery for Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Dorian. I coordinated with FEMA on every single deployment. He paused. I know exactly how disaster relief funding works, how it is allocated, how it is deployed, how it is tracked, and how it is audited. He opened the report. So when I read this FEMA Inspector General audit, certain things jumped out at me. Things that do not make sense to someone who has actually done this work. Things that look very wrong. He looked at Miller. On September 8th of last year, you signed an emergency authorization releasing $2.7 billion from the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund. The authorization memo states, quote, immediate deployment for Hurricane Helena response and Western states wildfire emergency operations, end quote. He set the memo down. Hurricane Helena made landfall on September 2nd, 6 days before your authorization. The damage assessments were still being conducted. FEMA had not even finished preliminary surveys, but you released $2.7 billion. He paused. That is unusual, Mr. Miller. In my experience, FEMA does not release multi-billion-dollar allocations before damage assessments are complete. So my first question is, what was the emergency that required bypassing standard assessment procedures? Miller leaned forward. Congressman, emergency authorizations are designed for rapid response to ensure resources reach affected communities without bureaucratic delays. The situation required, I'm going to stop you right there. Moskowitz held up his hand. Because I actually know what rapid response looks like. I have deployed emergency funds. I have coordinated disaster relief. I have worked with FEMA administrators in real time during active hurricanes. He pulled out a second document. This is the FEMA deployment log for Hurricane Helene. It shows every dollar FEMA actually spent on hurricane response through March of this year. 6 months after the storm, temporary housing assistance, individual assistance grants, public infrastructure repairs, debris removal, medical services, all of it documented. He opened it. Total FEMA spending on Hurricane Helene response through March, $340 million. He looked at Miller. You authorized $2.7 billion. FEMA deployed $340 million. That is a discrepancy of $2.36 billion. He did the math slowly, deliberately. Where is $2.36 billion, Mr. Miller? A murmur started in the gallery. Moskowitz was not done, and the wildfire operations you mentioned in your authorization memo, Western States Wildfire Emergency Operations. He pulled out a third document. This is the National Interagency Fire Center report for last year's wildfire season. It documents total federal wildfire suppression costs across all Western states. Forest Service, BLM, FEMA contributions, everything. He opened to a flag page. Total federal suppression costs for the entire wildfire season, $412 million, the entire season, every fire, every state. He set it down. So even if every single dollar of wildfire spending came from your $2.7 billion authorization, which it did not, that still leaves over $1.9 billion unaccounted for. He paused. Mr. Miller, where are the disaster funds? The room went quiet, the heavy kind of quiet. Moskowitz continued, his voice steady. So let me help you, Mr. Miller. Maybe you do not remember where $2.7 billion went. Let me show you. He pulled out the authorization form itself. This is your emergency authorization from September 8th, and at the bottom, in the section marked Recipient Entity, there is a name, Emergency Response Solutions, LLC. He held it up for the cameras. Emergency Response Solutions. Sounds legitimate, right? Sounds like a company that responds to emergencies and helps disaster victims. He set it down, so I looked them up. This is what I found. He pulled out a corporate registration document, Emergency Response Solutions, LLC. Date of incorporation, August 25th. He looked up, 14 days before your authorization. The company that received $2.7 billion in disaster relief funding did not exist 2 weeks earlier. The room went completely silent. Moskowitz continued. Registered agent, a corporate services firm in Wilmington, Delaware. The same address used by 340,000 other shell companies. No physical office. No equipment. No personnel. No disaster response experience. No prior FEMA contracts, no history of emergency management work. He pulled out another page, but they do have a bank account. And on September 10th, 2 days after receiving $2.7 billion, that account made 4 wire transfers. He read from the document, $890 million to an account in the Cayman Islands, $670 million to an account in Switzerland, $620 million to an account in Singapore, $520 million to an account in the British Virgin Islands. He let those numbers hang in the air. 4 wire transfers, 4 offshore accounts, total $2.7 billion. Every single dollar. He looked at Miller. Mr. Miller, I ran disaster response in Florida. I deployed emergency funds after hurricanes. I have worked with every legitimate disaster response contractor in this country, and I have never, not once, not ever, seen disaster relief money go to offshore accounts. He paused. Because disaster relief money is supposed to go to victims, to families who lost their homes, to communities that need to rebuild, to people who need help. Not to the Cayman Islands. The room erupted, not with shouting, with the low, angry rumble of people realizing they are watching something far worse than incompetence. Now, I need to stop for a second and say this. If you believe $2.7 billion in disaster relief money deserves an explanation, hype this video right now. The hype button is right next to like. You can hype 3 times a day for free. We have 7 days to get this into the top 100 most hyped videos on YouTube. Every single hype counts. Do it now, then keep watching, because what Moskowitz reveals next proves the offshore accounts connect to Miller's associates. Moskowitz waited for quiet. So let me ask you again, Mr. Miller, and this time I want a real answer. Where are the disaster funds that were supposed to help hurricane victims and wildfire survivors? Miller opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His attorney whispered something urgent. Miller shook his head, and that is when the silence started. Moskowitz pulled out his phone, opened the stopwatch app, held it up. I am going to time this, Mr. Miller, because the American people deserve to know how long you are willing to sit here protecting whoever stole disaster relief money from victims who lost everything. He pressed start. The room was completely still. 10 seconds. Miller's jaw clenched tight. 20 seconds. His lead attorney writing frantically on the legal pad. 30 seconds. A Republican congressman from Texas leaned into his microphone. Jared, my state had wildfires last year. My constituents are still waiting for help. They need to know where that money went. Miller looked at him, said nothing. 40 seconds. Moskowitz stood up, still holding the stopwatch. Mr. Miller, I managed Hurricane Irma response. 134 deaths. $50 billion in damage. Every single dollar mattered. Every generator, every tarp, every bottle of water, because people's lives depended on it. 50 seconds. Families were trapped on rooftops. Communities had no power. Hospitals were running on backup generators. 60 seconds. 1 full minute. And you took $2.7 billion meant for disaster victims and gave it to a company that did not exist 2 weeks earlier. A company that sent all of it offshore within 48 hours. The committee chairman spoke. Mr. Miller, you are under oath. Answer the question. Where are the disaster funds? 70 seconds. Miller's hands trembled slightly. He pressed them flat on the table to stop it. 80 seconds. A Democrat from Florida stood up. Jared is right. Hurricane victims in my district are still living in FEMA trailers. They are still waiting for help. And you are sitting here silent about $2.7 billion. 90 seconds. Moskowitz checked the stopwatch. 1.5 minutes, Mr. Miller. I have seen FEMA administrators account for every dollar in real time during active disasters, with storms still raging, with people still trapped, with communities still flooding. 100 seconds. And you cannot account for $2.7 billion in a congressional hearing 6 months later. 110 seconds. Miller's face had gone gray. 120 seconds. 2 full minutes. Moskowitz walked back to his table, picked up one more document. Mr. Miller, while you are sitting there silent, let me tell you what else the Inspector General found. They tracked those 4 offshore accounts, and within 1 week those accounts made secondary transfers. Smaller amounts distributed to 31 different recipients. 130 seconds. He held up the list. Law firms, consulting groups, private investment funds. And here is what is interesting. 4 of those 31 recipients have direct connections to your office. 140 seconds. One is a former deputy who left DHS in August, 1 month before your authorization. One is a contractor who worked on your policy team. One is a law firm that represents your associates. One is a consulting group where your former chief of staff now works. 150 seconds. The money meant for hurricane victims ended up in accounts connected to your staff, Mr. Miller. 160 seconds, 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Moskowitz stopped walking. Mr. Miller, I am going to count to 167, and then I am going to enter every page of this Inspector General audit into the congressional record. And I am going to move to refer this to the Department of Justice. Because what you did is not just incompetence. It is theft from disaster victims. 163, 164, 166, 167. He pressed stop, 2 minutes and 47 seconds. He turned to the committee. Mr. Chairman, the witness has refused to answer. I move to enter the complete FEMA Office of Inspector General audit into the congressional record, all 284 pages. I further move to refer this matter immediately to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation into misappropriation of federal disaster relief funds and violations of the Stafford Act. The motions were seconded immediately. Both passed unanimously. Moskowitz gathered his documents. Mr. Miller, I ran disaster response in Florida. I know what it looks like when someone actually cares about helping people who lost everything in a hurricane. And I know what it looks like when someone steals from them. He pointed at the FEMA report, 167 seconds. That is how long you sat here protecting whoever took $2.7 billion from hurricane victims and wildfire survivors. Money that should have gone to families rebuilding their homes. Money that should have helped communities restore power and water. Money that should have provided shelter for people who lost everything. He paused. That silence tells me everything I need to know, and it tells the American people everything they need to know. The hearing ended. Miller was escorted out. His attorneys surrounded him, but there was nothing to say. Jared Moskowitz had just documented the entire chain: FEMA authorization, shell company incorporation, offshore wire transfers, secondary payments to Miller's former associates. 167 seconds of silence, the longest refusal to answer a question about disaster relief in congressional history. This is not about politics. This is about disaster relief. Money that is supposed to go to families who lost their homes in hurricanes, to communities trying to rebuild after wildfires, to people who need help desperately, and $2.7 billion of it went to offshore accounts instead. Subscribe to Patel Report Files right now, because tomorrow we investigate Emergency Response Solutions LLC. Who incorporated it, who controls the offshore accounts, and where the secondary transfers went. The shell company, the Cayman Islands account, the 4 associates connected to Miller's office, all documented, all public record. Share this video everywhere. Hurricane victims are still waiting for help. Wildfire survivors are still rebuilding, and $2.7 billion more of them is sitting in offshore accounts. 167 seconds. That is how long Stephen Miller protected whoever stole disaster money. And Jared Moskowitz, someone who actually saved lives during hurricanes, just made sure everyone knows it. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. That is all it took to prove $2.7 billion in disaster relief was stolen, and every second is documented.